I want to tell you about our next panel, which is called Listen and Learn, Indigenous Leadership Panel. The hospitality industry at large can learn from Indigenous professionals, culinary techniques, and ways of working. So don't miss this candid panel discussion on how we can engage and support Indigenous ideas and talent and increase access for Indigenous entrepreneurs while enriching the Indigenous consumer experience. Now, along with this informative session, you'll also walk away with a tote bag, which I like. And these tote bags feature custom artwork with a meaningful message. American Express Canada has partnered with Blake, and I'm going to pronounce Blake's last name properly, Ajay Konob, excuse me, I'm so sorry, I got it wrong. And he's an Anishinaabe artist, and he's created a piece that illustrates inclusivity and belonging. And this artwork is on the signage, which you can see distributed to Amex merchants across the country to help them communicate acceptance and help customers feel connected to their local community. So let's get into this panel, and I want to introduce you to the panel moderator, Jenny Lassard. She's the executive director of ICANN, and on her panel today, she's going to have Tanya Brandt, who is the chef and owner of Yahweh Khan Foods, Scott Eiserhoff, who is the owner of Pipi Chi. Scott, I'm so sorry for getting that name wrong. We've got Inez Cook, who is the owner of Salmon and Bannock Bistro, and they are here to present their opinions, feelings, and of course, great ideas. Give them a warm welcome applause.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here today. Hello. I just want to acknowledge that we are visitors here, and we're so happy to be here in the city of Toronto on the traditional territory of many, many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee. Did I say that correctly?
No. Haudenosaunee.
Haudenosaunee, thank you. That's part of learning, is to learn how to say names correctly. Sorry about that. Yeah, and the Wendat people, and it's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I live and work on Treaty 4 territory near the city that is now known as Regina, and it is home to many nations as well, including the Métis Nation, I am a citizen of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. And also, as Richard said, the interim executive director of the Indigenous Culinary of Associated Nations. So it's a chef network all across Canada. We're growing that network, and I'm so excited to be chatting with these amazing chefs and restaurateurs on the stage today. I'm so excited. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in their own words. So we're going to start with Tanya Brandt.
Hello. Okay. Sego sewa gwego, Tani Gajija Brent Yogets, Oswega, de Lado, Ganyange Haga, Noga Hunjolo, Dano Wagneto, Dano Wagatsununi, Jiga Iges. So, hello everybody, my name is Tanya Brandt. I am from Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, which is just on the other side of Hamilton, super close. So, if you want to visit, come ahead. I'm a Mohawk Nation Turtle Clan member. I'm a lifelong chef. I've been working in restaurants since I was 12 years old, so it's going to be 29 years this year that I've been working in restaurants. So about 2.5 years ago, I opened my own shop. It's called Yawego, which means it's delicious in the Mohawk language. This year, I actually had the honor of competing on Top Chef Canada Season X. And yeah, kind of been doing the content thing. I do have a series coming out with APTN. I don't have a date yet, but I do believe that's supposed to be coming out this year. And we were just granted $1.4 million to do a second season. So I'm extremely proud of that, because that's getting our message out there. How can everyday Canadians learn about Indigenous people, and how can you work our foods into your everyday foods, and how can we accept yours, because I believe that culturally relevant food is important for everybody, and it's just another stage that we got to get to, so to find out how we can live sustainably. Yawa.
What's the name of the series, Tanya?
Oh, sorry. The name of the series is One Dish, One Spoon, which refers to the dish with one spoon treaty wampum belt that is reflective of this. They call it the Beaver Basin area, and it's basically a 400-year-old, the oldest in the world, just an acknowledgement of the rights of the environment. It's the oldest one in the world. So what it is us showing everyday Canadians how we think in this area, how we live sustainably, how you take some, right? You take some, you leave for the rest, you leave for nature to regenerate itself. So it's all these things, not necessarily a cooking show, but I do cook in every show. It's more of a docu-series talking about those wampum belts.
Yeah, right. So, Wache Misoe, Scottish Nachasun, Ochinina Katawapskat First Nations. I always get emotional when I introduce myself in Cree, in Omashkeguin, just because I'm relearning the language. I spoke it and I understood it more when I was a child. That's just a little, that's why I get so emotional. I get really happy. But also getting this platform is it's an honor for me. It's an honor for all of us. So I am chef and founder of Pipistjo. I know the spelling of it is not phonetic, but that's how it's spelt in English letters. Looks better in dialed with the syllabics. So Pipistjo is an Indigenous concept. It's my stories and it's from my perspective. A lot of Indigenous cuisine for me was a struggle just because it's not documented. So once we started catering and then word got out, I'm like, okay, I gotta name this business something in my language. And Pipistjo is the first name that came to my mind. And Pipistjo means robin. And that was a name my grandfather gave me when I was a little kid. And the reason why is because like in Pipistjos are like signals for spring. And for me, when I was visiting my grandparents, it was like I wanted to do all this catching up because I haven't seen them for like 5-6 months. And I was just talking to them, asking questions. And there was one time I just annoyed my grandfather because he was busy doing something. And he said, "Gandebina machende Pipistjo." And ever since that day, like all my families just started calling me Pipistjo. But yeah, so I'm chef and founder of Pipistjo in Edmonton, Alberta. I'm from the Attawapskat First Nations, which is along the west coast of James Bay. So I'm from Northern Ontario and Miigwech.
Yes, Madame Hooks, Ansla Inez, Ansla Sietsmana. Good afternoon. My name is Inez Cook. My traditional name is Sneetsmana. I'm from the Newhawk Nation in Bella Coola, British Columbia. I am the co-founder and owner of Salmon and Bannock Bistro in Vancouver, and I'm the owner of Salmon and Bannock on the Fly at YVR International Departures, the first Indigenous restaurant at any airport in North America. Very happy to be here.
Okay, the first question I'm going to gear at you, Tanya, but then any of you, the other two that want to chime in too, I would love that. So reading about your childhood and how you grew up, you were on the land. Food sovereignty wasn't really a struggle for you growing up, I don't think, because your father hunted and trapped and fished, and your mom, you planted a large garden. Your mom is a Mohawk seed saver, that could be a whole other multi-day discussion on the importance of that. But what does food sovereignty mean to you? And I also read or heard you say something about that you're helping your community get their palate back. And that really struck me. Maybe you could speak about that a bit, food sovereignty and reclaiming our palates.
Hello? I feel like this isn't on every time I talk. Yeah, I mean, I did grow up, I guess some people say, oh, you grew up traditional. I'm like, I don't know what that means, we just grew up. But one of the things is I do come from agrarian people, so we weren't hunter-gatherers, we were farmers, which is actually extremely rare for the area that I'm in, and every other nation around us wasn't like that. So we were a little different in that respect. So I do come from a long line of people that grew stuff, right? And we brought our seeds to this territory from upstate New York because we left during the American Revolution, we sided with the British and all that jazz. So it was really important to my mom growing up that we just always had a garden, and she wanted us to grow up like she did. So my mom was an educator. My dad worked for GM. So I did have a good upbringing, but my mom chose. She wanted us to grow up with no electricity. I had to get buckets of water to bring into the house. I know what it's like to chop wood, right? So I'm extremely, the powers that call me. But it made us extremely resourceful, right? And my life was really kind of a winter and a summer, right? In the summer, we might be like weeding gardens and things like that. But it was definitely my mom who instilled in us the importance of our traditional foods, not knowing even at that age that I would ever become a chef or that she would ever come along. My mom was an elementary school teacher, and then in her retirement decided to make a whole garden that we call Mohawk Seed Keeper's Garden. In the last couple of years, we've been building an earthship to house that, right? To make it a Haudenosaunee gardening and technical skills house. Because to me, all of our technical skills in Haudenosaunee culture go back to food, whether it's like construction, wood, we have corn pounders, like growing, like everything, our cycle of ceremonies, everything goes back to food, because if you don't have that, you have nothing, right? And I'm honored to be able to carry that tradition, knowing that some of the seeds that we carry in my family, we know we can trace back about 400 years to my direct family still carrying those seeds. We still have our original tobacco seeds that came from upstate New York. So that was really instilled at a young age, and it took me almost 20 years into my career to say, oh, I didn't know that people were interested in, food and Indigenous stuff and putting those together, and how can I take that and how can I bring it to everyday Canadians? How can we do it in a way, because it's hard, right? I got to think about what it is I'm going to grow for the next year, what it is I'm going to need every time I buy something, every time I go foraging. So it's a lot of forecasting involved in that, and that's one of the biggest challenge for Indigenous chefs is where are we sourcing our ingredients from? So with that being a challenge, that's something that I like to promote is just we need allies, right? We need more people that are going to grow our foods, but at this day and age, we've already given all those seeds away, and then they all got wrecked, and now they want them again. But now we have that voice to say, where are they going? What are you doing with them? What are you putting on them, right? And we really need to do that because every Canadian, even in this room, needs that because it's our diets that are being affected. It's people that are becoming allergic to Roundup, not to gluten, right? So all of those things, we can go back to our original seeds, but it's doing it with mindfulness and promoting the fact that this is the last kick at the can. Are you sure you want to do that again? Right?
Did you have anything you wanted to add, Scott? I know we were at a conference recently, and we were feeding about 1,000 people, and Scott's original dish had a story around it to do with goose and dumplings, a dish that he had at his grandfather's place with a nice smoky broth. And at the last minute, the goose wasn't able to be supplied, and Scott had to, on the fly, I think with a couple days' notice, switch his dish to a pickerel cheek dish. So I was just wondering if you could talk, yay for him. Can we get a round of applause for that kind of action? And he had a smile on his face.
Too.
But would you mind just talking a little bit about that part of food sovereignty, about how a dish isn't just a dish, it has a story, and how like being able to access, I'm going to let you take it, sorry, I'm going to stop talking.
I might get more emotional right now, but whenever we do dishes at Pippa's show, I really try to remember dishes from my childhood and recreate them and put my own perspective on them. I've been cooking for over 16 years at different restaurants, mostly Italian. So there's a lot of Italian influences in the dishes that I do. And yeah, the pickerel cheeks, actually I think that dish turned out better than the original story because that was a whole different new story that actually brought back memories for me. I remember my grandfather would cut the pickerel cheeks off and fry them in butter and give them to me. So one fish, you only get 2 cheeks, right? And they're very small. You got to fight for it. But my grandfather always gave me those. And
You know you were bougie back
yeah, I was bougie. But I guess Indigenous food sovereignty is going to be different from person to person just because they grew up differently. They have different stories that they were told by family, or even like whenever I recreate something in a conventional kitchen, I find it difficult to connect just because my memories of all the food that I've eaten, as I always had that smell of smoke. So that's like, I kind of struggle in the kitchen that I don't show it. So I'm like, I try lightly smoking things like in a chafing dish, and like I just do my own rig, right? I set up, and then if I can get that little bit of smoke, for me that completes the dish. And whenever I taste it, food has this like powerful medicine where it takes me back in time to sitting around that fire, eating a meal that your grandfather cooked you, or your grandmother. And the story behind the goose was we hunt a lot of geese during March. So that's a Niskapishim, which means the goose moon. And that's when the geese start migrating. And I remember sitting in a teepee and watching all my aunties and all the elders plucking this goose. And as a little kid, things are like exaggerated. You see geese getting plucked and it looks so violent, but you see there's so much care that is put into that process. There's so much love. And I truly believe when I cook now, if I'm feeling off, I'll take a few minutes and I'll remember these stories, and I come back to the kitchen feeling like rejuvenated. And there's a saying that my parents told me all the time, like, never cook when you're angry. And I believe that's very true, because food's medicine. Anger is also something negative. It's a negative energy that you're putting into your food. So as a kid, I'm like, yeah, whatever, you know. But now I truly believe, because whenever I cook when I'm angry, nothing works out. And it's very true. It's very powerful. And all the dishes that we do, whenever I taste them, it just brings me back to that moment in time out on the land, like Dawich with a bay, and smelling like smoke all the time. And whenever I come out of the kitchen after smoking meat or smoking vegetables, I smell that smoke, and it just brings me back to a very happy place in my life.
And now your daughter is going to associate that smell with you in cooking probably as she grows up.
So funny. We have a fire pit in the backyard, and she'll pretend to be building a fire and start pretending she's cooking something. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm a chef like Tato. Tato is father in Ukrainian, so she speaks Cree and Ukrainian and English, and whenever she's talking, it's a really interesting language.
Inez, as a restaurateur, how does food sovereignty come into play at Salmon and Bannock and Salmon and Bannock on the Fly?
It's interesting as a restaurateur, it's very hard. Food sovereignty is a very big issue right now, as we have to use all commercially supplied ingredients. And of course, we understand for food safety, everything needs to be commercially supplied. However, I like to bring up this idea of perspectives. If you were the only French restaurant in Paris and you were told you weren't allowed to serve your foods, what do you think would happen? Or if you were in Tokyo, Japan, and you had the only Japanese restaurant in Tokyo and you were told you were not allowed to serve your foods, people would go nuts. But being the only Indigenous restaurant in Vancouver, and I tell people I'm not allowed to serve my Indigenous foods, do you know what people say? Oh, that sucks. We need to do better. And hopefully now there's a lot more attention to this, and hopefully now we can start working towards doing better.
Oh yeah, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that that is a huge issue that a lot of people don't know, that we are kind of bound by having to buy commercial foods, and how do we present those in a way that's traditional? I just don't listen. But I'm on reserve, so that's totally different, that I can serve game meat, I can serve moose meat, I can serve a lot of these things that Inez can only dream about serving, right? And that's not right. It's not right. I can serve this to people every day and never had anybody get sick or had any issues, but she still can't do that. And that's one of the things that being at this show, being at Restaurant Canada, we do need that allyship to say, hey, we do think that Indigenous people deserve to have culturally relevant food. We do believe that we as Canadians believe we can try that too, right? And I just think that that is a good issue that she really touched on. That is a huge, it's a huge thing for us having Indigenous restaurants.
It is. when I had my restaurant and then my catering business and now culinary consulting, one of my favorite ingredients to work with, because it was part of my heritage and my culture, are choke cherries. Does anybody know what a choke cherry is? Yeah, there's no substitute for a choke cherry. And also, when I harvest them, I'm laying down tobacco and thanking that plant nation, and I harvest enough for myself and my use, and then I give it away to people that need it for ceremonies and for teachings too. So you can't just look, I mean, maybe you can order it from a catalog. Is there anybody here that grows and sells choke cherries? But that's just one ingredient. There's muskrat is another flavor that you could never replicate that on a farm, because they eat the plants and all the different roots in the lake, and then they taste like that, and they bring that medicine to our little baby livers that can't handle all that powerful medicine. Anyway, so yes, very, very important, and that's part of what ICANN is doing too, is to bring discussion and talk around that food sovereignty. I want to say you're so lucky that you get to serve those, but you are lucky, but you're doing work every day to be where you are and do what you're doing. So thank you very much.
A lot of people tell us we're lucky. Oh, you're lucky to have a garden.
Yeah.
You're lucky to have an earthship. You're lucky to grow up traditional. I didn't feel very damn lucky when I was 12 years old, weeding a garden, breaking my back, cutting wood, drawing water. But I like to feel like it went somewhere eventually.
Thank you. Inez, I'm going to throw it back to you again. Indigenous food, how do we make sure that Indigenous food well, obviously it's more than a trend, or the word that you absolutely hate, a theme. How do we keep Indigenous culinary experiences authentic?
Okay, so the word theme is a trigger. We're not a theme. We're not Disneyland. We are living cultures, and we're right here. We're your doctor, we're your neighbor, we're right here, we're your friend. And we always have been right here. And people thinking that, now it's a hot trend, let's get on it. And it's interesting how chefs, they're always looking for the next great thing, the next big thing. And that keeps them creative, it keeps them fresh. Of course, we understand that. But, most chefs, their studies are French, the French kitchen. So anybody can study the French kitchen and open a French restaurant. For the Indigenous people, we've been underrepresented, and it's only recently that we can actually celebrate our culture, our heritage, our language. This is all new, and this is sacred, and all of our meals have a story. They all have a meaning. As you heard, all of us have different meanings, and we're not just one thing. We have over 600 nations in Canada with so many different representations. And of course, I can't speak for anybody but myself, but this is something I'm extremely passionate about. And I think if a non-Indigenous person wants to learn some Indigenous recipes, maybe a good way to go about it would be to honor the Indigenous person and maybe do a trade. Say, I was really inspired by your dish, and can I trade you my favorite recipe of my thing? And, make it for your family dinner. Maybe not profit from it. Maybe leave that for the rest of us that are just rebuilding and celebrating and using our platform to showcase who we are. I think that's really important right now. And whether you think we're on trend or not, we've always been here, and we were the originators of the 100-mile diet. We were the originators of all of those. And we've been, the front runners of all of those trends. So it's important to share that knowledge. Thank you.
Hello. I was going to say, that's like what Sean says, is an Indigenous diet is what the paleo diet wishes it was.
Did you, Tanya or Scott, have anything to add on that, how to keep Indigenous cuisine authentic?
I think authenticity is the root of being Indigenous, living those stories, living the experience, and being true to yourself, and really true to where you come from, the land that you're from. it like for me, whenever I cook, like after the end of a dinner, I feel really exhausted because I put so much of my energy into preparing a dinner for like 20 people. And during the preparation, like I don't eat. I kind of look at it as ceremony. Like I'm doing like a 8-hour fast. Sure I'm gonna be tasting the food, but at the end of the day, I'm hungry, and after like we sit down as all the staff sit down and we just enjoy one meal, and just talk about how much fun we had, and I'm always told I make people cry at the dinners. Yeah, I was ashamed of crying actually, and my wife taught me like, it shows true strength when you could show your emotions. And it's even more now that I have a daughter. I'll bawl my eyes in front of her, right? And she's like, "Tato, are you okay?" Yeah, and then she just embraces me and it's like, "It's okay." And then I cry even more.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tanya. No, you go.
Okay, I never know if this is on. I forgot where I was gonna go, but either way, she was talking about authenticity in cooking. I don't know, this is just a huge thing for me because I believe that everyday Canadians deserve to have Canadian food, right? And you're never gonna sell an Indigenous dish like an Indigenous person. You're never gonna have the stories to those ingredients. You're never gonna know the people that took the time to grow those things and to honor those things while they were growing, to ask for them to be medicine for you or whatever it is that you need that food to be, right? So there's different teachings and things that Indigenous people can do, but we need everyday Canadians, right? We need everyday Canadians to grow this so we can offer those even in our traditional communities, because like you said, giving our communities their palate back, because a lot of them just haven't had it for so long, or they're like, oh, well, I haven't had moose meat in 20 years, right? And those types of things. How do we change that to where that's a good portion of their diet, right? Because I know some people that have done studies with Indigenous people and the amount of just like diabetes being rampant and vascular disease, lactose intolerance, all of those things. Right now, I don't feel like we have enough to do that, not to feed the amount of people that we have to feed. And we want to include everybody in those stories. I had Samuel, the Bocuse d'Or last year chef, come while he was preparing for his culinary competition, that he came to Six Nations to visit me and my mom just to talk and say, I want to know how you feel about these foods. How can I do that without like just stealing a concept or things like that? And I really appreciate it that that's something in the industry that chefs are very passionate, because they all have their own traditions, their own cultural foods, and all of these things that they have, they understand it, right? They understand what it's like to come from countries where you're not allowed to do what it is that you do, right? And I just think that it's a really big point, but it is something that has to be addressed. I don't know the answer to it, but I think we all just need to do a little bit better, right? And have a little bit more acknowledgement, because I don't think a plate of food should have 12,000 miles on it to get to you eating it when it can have 10 miles on it. But I also understand that culturally relevant food is huge and everybody deserves that. So how do we change those things, and how do we make it so everyday Canadians and Indigenous people can eat? Because I feel like we have the technology, we have the manpower, we have all the things we need to do it. We just haven't done it yet.
Thank you very much, Tanya. I have one last question, and then we're going to open it up for questions from you to these amazing folks. Tanya, you were on Top Chef season 10. You have a lot of other media coverage that you've received. I was going down the Tanya pages, and I was like, okay, I have enough here. Inez has been featured in everything from National Geographic, The Guardian, Time Magazine. Scott was featured in Bon Appetit magazine. Woohoo! And voted one of Canada's best new restaurants, Trailblazer Award by Air Canada. Why is it important for people, especially Indigenous youth, to see these amazing success stories? And how important is that, do you think, in the mentorship aspect of people seeing people that kind of look like them in the media doing these amazing things? Yeah, you go.
Representation. Representation is very important, because when I was a young chef, there was no Indigenous chefs being published in magazines. The only one I can know of is Chef Wolfman, who inspired me to go to culinary school. I never completed it because I hated it. I didn't like the French. The French, like, you gotta be, everything has to be done by the book. But then I think about how my grandparents cooked it. They cooked whatever the hell they wanted, whatever was available during that season. And yeah, and then get yelled at for it. And I'm sorry. But yeah, when we got published in En route for top 30 best new restaurants of 2022, I just thought of it, I'm like, okay, that's just someone's opinion. But then I started getting messages from Indigenous chefs saying, hey, that's effing awesome. You're the first chef I ever seen like to be published on that list. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And then I started thinking, I'm like, Pipistrel is everything that I wanted as a young chef. To have an Indigenous mentor, to have an Indigenous to work in an Indigenous establishment. I'm putting the work into it, and now we're hiring young Indigenous people to work at our restaurant, front of house, back of house. And I'm very proud of that. And yeah, so I'm putting everything that I wanted as a young chef to where I am now, and I'm just putting my money where my mouth is now, just staying true to myself.
That's awesome, Scott. How about you, Inez? As a restaurateur, your restaurant's been open for 13 years, so in restaurant years, that's like 107 years. So like, it's dog years. Like what would it have been like when you opened up to have someone leading by example like you are now?
Yeah, it's interesting. Those 13 years, add a pandemic in there. The C word, we don't say it anymore. Yeah, when I opened, I thought I'd be lined up. I thought people would be like, oh my God, an Indigenous restaurant, Vancouver, yay. Nope, nobody knew who we were. Nobody knew anything about us. Vancouver is a very, very picky, culinary, snobby scene. And I come from the airline industry. I was in the airlines for 33 years. I retired in September from Air Canada. And I wasn't in the culinary world. Nobody knew me. And I'm adopted, so I'm part of the 60s Scoop. I actually wrote a children's book about that as well. But so the Indigenous world didn't know me. The culinary world didn't know me. And nobody showed up. And we opened during the 2010 Olympics. And there was no customers for a really, really long time. I had to go to Money Mart, every payroll just to pay my staff. And I opened with a business partner. He left the business about 6 years ago. And he was like, we're not making any money. Like, we need to shut the doors. And I'm like, no, I know it's going to work. I know it's going to work. How do you know it's going to work? The dollars and cents aren't working. I know it's going to work. Just stick it out. I know it's going to work. And I don't know how I knew, but I knew. And there had been an Indigenous restaurant years prior to me. She'd closed and retired, but there hadn't been anything in several years. And now, finally, people are starting to understand there's Indigenous chefs, and it's growing across our nations, which is amazing. And now, like, anywhere you travel across Canada, you can try to find Indigenous culinary. The scene is really growing. And with amazing people like this, there is more youth being able to see that anything is possible. And it feels like it's a really great time. Economic reconciliation is what I'm all about. And that's what we're working towards. And it's really nice being put onto this platform, celebrating this and being able to use our voices in a good way and sharing that with all of you. Thank you.
Tanya, do you want to bring it home? I can't even remember what the question was, but.
I think it was something to do with youth. No. One of the things that I like that Scott talked about is one of the things that you'll see is very different for an Indigenous kitchen is just Everybody's in there, and their auntie and their cousin and their little son, and everybody's in there. And it's important like that to bring a good mind. Me being Haudenosaunee, it's important for us to bring a good mind to the garden. But one of those things is very different is that you'll see that in an Indigenous kitchen, and a lot of Indigenous chefs can't take everyday kitchens because they're just like, why are these people so mad all the time, right? And it's like, we're eating, we should be happy, it's food, right? So that's one of the things that's different that you'll see in Indigenous kitchen is that everybody's welcome, because in being Indigenous people, us and our life and our growth and the things that we're supposed to expose our children to all come from our culture. And one of those things is that even when you're young, you have a job to do, and that job is to watch and see what's happening, help out if you can, and become part of that when you're old enough. So that's one of the things in an Indigenous kitchen that you'll see is that everybody's in there, right? Or there's popping in to see what's the progress report here, right? And it's just a lot of love, a lot of heart, a lot of encouragement, a lot of teaching, and mentors and mentees are super important. And that's how we're spreading that culture and how we're networking as Indigenous chefs. So with all of that, I think we could take some questions, but that's one thing that I'm extremely proud of, is to be able to share that concept of an Indigenous kitchen.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think there's probably time for about 2 questions. So I think Richard's going to help out with that.
Essentially, we can use this microphone right here in the center. We have time for 2 questions. Hello, beautiful. Welcome back. Please go ahead, ask the question.
A little short. So now that Indigenous chefs are so popular, do you think there's going to be a school, a culinary school for them to get trained at that doesn't put you through the French process?
I think that French process is still important. Knowing the hierarchy in a kitchen, there's definitely things that we can take from that and bring to Indigenous kitchen that makes us more professional at what we do. We do need to think about health standards and things like that. At the end of the day, I'm not against being healthy and making sure nobody's getting sick from your food. And that's definitely one of the things, but almost every college, I know Ontario Culinary School is developing programs that's introducing Indigenous foods into their culinary programs, and some of them have gardens going and First Nations that are local to them that they're working with. So that's really encouraging to know that they're going to see that in the country very soon.
Awesome presentation, Miigwech.
Red River College in Winnipeg has an amazing Indigenous culinary program specifically for Indigenous people, and it's a smaller Red River College? Yeah. Oh, Red River College, yes, RRC. They actually helped at our Taste of Turtle Island event, the students in March, and it was just amazing. And it's even from the location of the school to make it more accessible for people to some of the supports that are put in place is just super awesome. And that's one. And yes, I think it's going to be growing and evolving. So yes, awesome.
I've got just one burning question myself as I sat in the audience like everyone else and watched you guys talk about your stories and experiences and developing your brands and restaurants and whatnot. How did you come to the conclusion of your menus, knowing that you had to put yourselves out there, compete with mainstream restaurants and different audiences, especially and as you have a restaurant in an airport, so the traffic is uncanny and the amount of people you have coming through. How do you hold on to your roots but yet somewhat appease people who might want something potentially slightly mainstream or different at the same time?
It's interesting because on my Broadway location, it's a bistro, and during lockdown, we had to come up with a way to keep the lights on, and we introduced Uber Eats. And so none of our food is fast. We don't have a microwave. Everything's made with love. So how could we come up with that Uber Eats menu? So we came up with a brand-aligned menu for Uber Eats that could be ready quickly. And that was what inspired our YVR menu. So for example, at Broadway, we have a bison pot roast, slow braised 24 hours dinner on our menu. But at the airport, we do a pulled slow braised bison hot sandwich, open face sandwich with bison gravy. So it's similar flavors, it's brand aligned, but it's available faster. And they can still, so it's salmon and bannock on the fly, so they can actually still try our flavors. Yeah.
What about you, Scott?
What was the question?
Just like, how do you stay true to your roots while also being mindful of customers' palates and what they require?
Sometimes I disregard the palettes because And then some days when we do the dinners, when we have, like when we plan for 2 weeks, sometimes I'll change the menu up on the last day. Or I'll wake up and my wife's like, did you think of a menu? And I'm like, yes. And we'll get the products and make the menu that day. Because I think a lot of people, once they see a menu, they'll have preferences and stuff that they don't want to eat, so they'll put it as like an allergy and that really annoys me. Just like, if you want to try if you want to try indigenous food, come in with an open heart, with an open mouth. Be open to even trying it. You don't have to finish it. You could try it, and I'm more than happy. And just staying true to all the stories. I'm never ever going to recreate a dish that's not from my perspective. It's always from my childhood. Or I asked my grandparents, when my grandmother was alive, I'd ask them, like, what did you eat? And like, I want to get her donut recipe on there. But yeah, just not catering to picky eaters. I was ranting one day with my wife because there's a group of indigenous like students that came in, and then they're really talking about returning to a traditional way of life and decolonization, and they didn't want to eat tongue or livers. And I'm like, you talk about wanting to return to a traditional way of life, the traditional diets, but you can't eat tongue, buffalo tongue, moose tongue, bone marrow, everything that we've eaten from time immemorial. Like, I remember my grandparents roasting a moose femur over the fire, cracking it open and sucking all that marrow out. And then you got my aunties doing dirty jokes when you're a little kid, eh? I'm like, that's gross. But now I really wish I partaked in that, in eating all those foods. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
What about you, Tanya?
It's funny because I think I'm the exact opposite of Inez, that I don't do slow food, and I like to call it quick gourmet or everyday indigenous eating is what we call it, because I run a takeout shop and a catering company. It was something that was available. I opened during the pandemic. We do a daily menu because I'm a chef and a sucker for punishment. But in doing that, it was because knowing that I was working with rare foods that were changing from week to week, wanting to bring in things that I knew that I wasn't going to have enough to have a set menu. My place wasn't big enough to have a set menu. I didn't want to have a set menu because that's a slow, good way to kill a chef, right? Is to make them cook the same damn thing every day. So with that in mind, what I did was we came up with a concept, a lot of things, taking the time to braise and do things that a lot of restaurants aren't willing to do because it takes time and money, right? I own a takeout place, and we don't use the deep fryers. I've been open for 2.5 years, and we haven't put oil in them yet. I have 2 of them. Because I knew that I wanted, whatever it was that was coming out of the kitchen had to be done and in that box and out the door within 4 minutes, because that's what I wanted. And the minute you're putting in a deep fryer is 7 minutes, so that was totally out. It wasn't even an issue. We didn't even think about it. What came from that, though, is a lot healthier food. Right? We're introducing things like corn pastas and getting rid of gluten, just doing things that we want to reduce gluten. Indigenous cuisine doesn't have wheat, flour, dairy, processed sugars. All of these things just aren't there. So if you start with working with those ingredients, regardless of what you do to it, it's going to be a healthy meal, right? It's going to be real. It's going to be unprocessed. It's not coming from a can. It's not coming from a million miles away. It's not months old. But that's what I knew I was taking that on as a challenge, because I did open during the pandemic, right in the middle of it, and I didn't know what was going to happen. So doing those daily menus was just our research. I thought, we'll do this for the first couple of months. You know, people are getting the gist of what we're doing here. But what come from that is that we have over 100 different, we wrote them down one day, and we have over 100 different menu items that we make at Uego now. And so what I'm doing is training and building capacity for young chefs to learn those foods, but to mix it with everyday foods, and we make it everyday indigenous eating. So if you look at Uego's, like our Instagram page, it looks very, you'd be like, oh, well, that's normal. I make that at home. But that's the point. The point is that, you know what, put wild rice in there too, right? Use corn pasta instead of regular pasta. The type of cooking that we're doing, I want everyday people, Canadians, indigenous people, to say, I can make that. And it's like, yes, you can, and I want you to, because it's healthier, it's better for you, and there's not going to be negative side effects of doing that. So that was kind of the take that we took in Uego. It's just a big experiment. 2.5 years later, we're still doing the same thing, so it looks like we're doing something right. And most of our caterings where you'll really see indigenous food being served.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Inez. I know you're very, very busy people, and for you to take some time away to come here on the holiday weekend is amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you to Restaurants Canada for inviting us here. It means a lot to be on the stage and to talk to you. And I know that we were having discussion beforehand, and Scott, do you want to just speak about what you said about how it'll be great I'll just kind of paraphrase. No, you go.
I want to be a point in my life where I can just like walk down the street and eat at an Indigenous restaurant without thinking, oh, an Indigenous restaurant. You know, like we went to a French bistro yesterday. I didn't even think about, oh, cool, French food, you know, it's good food. I want to be at that point, and also like being invited to like conferences. I want to be invited to conferences not just because I'm an Indigenous chef, but just because I'm a chef. You know, I want to talk about the skills that I've learned over the years, and really the importance, like, I'm going to go off topic, but I'm just like, Pipistrel has really given me my own sovereignty in cooking my own food, doing whatever I want, teaching whoever I want, being a positive role model. I want to be that person. Yeah, Pipistrel has really given me a voice, and I think once those words were uttered from my mushroom, that's really put the gears in motion up until where I am now. So, Mingwech for listening to me talk, and all of us talk.
Thank you, Scott. And here's to the future of Indigenous culinary and culinary in general in Canada. Thank you for having us.